Likewise. Nice to see you.
Good evening.
Good evening, good evening.
Yeah. Swami.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the continuation of the discussion on the Yoga Sutras. This meeting will be recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. If you have missed any of the previous discussions, you may find it on YouTube. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Also, if you are not speaking, please mute yourself so as to minimize the disturbances. Also, please use the raise hand option of Zoom in order to maintain the queue. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome back.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah. So we'll begin. Thank you. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sarirasya cha vaidikena yopakurutam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. I think we were discussing the two important topics which are in a way which constitute the very essence of yoga tradition. That is, it's called yoga, or it could be called Samadhi. So there are three types of Samadhi in a general term mentioned in the yoga tradition. One is samyama, that is dharana, dhyanam and samadhi. Among the Ashtanga yogas, dharana, dhyanam and samadhi. The 6th, 7th and 8th stages together. That is a first step towards yoga. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. The chitta vritti nirodha, in its most sublime, highest aspect, is called asampragnata samadhi or nirbija samadhi, which is the highest, where you achieve this level of concentration without any object. You transcend all objects. But in that process, the first step is samyama. The second process is called sampragnata samadhi, where mind is still there, but you have reached a very high level of concentration with a focus, and beyond that there is the asampragnata samadhi, which takes you beyond samyama, where mind is no longer there, you transcend mind. And the yoga tradition, the definition of Sampragnata Samadhi comes in the 17th Sutra of Samadhipada. That is, Vitarka Vichara Ananda Asmita Anugama Sampragnataha. That is 17th Sutra of Samadhipada describes this Sampragnata Samadhi. I mean, that is a samadhi that is accompanied by vitarka, that is a process of discerning, and vichara, which is this higher type, and ananda and asmita. And the highest or the higher type of samadhi is mentioned in the 18th sutra that we briefly discussed earlier. That comes in the 18th sutra that we also discussed. But I want to give a short background of what we discussed so far. Now, first, let us discuss one important point. Patanjali talks about two types of yogis, just as he talks about two types of higher yoga, samprajnata and asamprajnata. He talks about two levels of yoga evolution. One is called videha or prakriti linas. When a yogi reaches the first of this highest level, he reaches a point where he doesn't attain liberation. The word liberation or enlightenment is a subject of discussion in Kaivalya Pada, the fourth Pada. He doesn't become totally liberated, but he reaches a very high level of evolution. That particular status is called Adhikarika Purusha or Prakriti Lina or Videha. Means they go beyond the body-mind complex awareness, but they may be born again. But when they are born, they will display some unique powers of mind. So the first stage is called the primary stage because at that stage they do not go beyond the cycle of birth and rebirth, and this is because they are still attracted towards these higher spiritual powers. That is the subject of discussion in Vibhuti Pada. In English book you find the powers. We already discussed that elaborately, Vibhuti Pada. So many unique powers of mind automatically come to a yogi. So they get attracted, they are not able to go beyond it. So many of the commentators interestingly mention that when you read about people with extraordinary spiritual powers, not material, not at the empirical material plane, but at spiritual powers, the memory, a great interest in propagating spiritual values, a supernatural ability to perceive things, to interpret things in a very authentic way from ancient scriptures and to practice them and to be fully involved in this higher life. They may be Prakriti-lina Purushas. They may be born as human beings, or sometimes they may live in the higher levels of existence. I mean, mostly comparable to angels in the Judeo-Christian tradition. You find they're all refined people. They live with a degree of spiritual awareness. They only do good things for others, but still they are not beyond this cycle of birth and death. They are born again, and when they are born again, they still remember their great spiritual past and they continue doing great things. So that term used in the yoga tradition is Adhikarika Purushas, roughly you can translate in English, authentic spiritual preceptors. That is the technical term used in the yoga tradition. The Videhas, they have transcended that obsession with the physical body. With normal human beings, they interpret themselves as at the physical level. I am this body-mind complex. I have these desires and achievements all related to the empirical world. But these great men and women, they transcend that plane. They're called Prakriti Lina Purusha or Videhas. Then there is a higher level of yoga evolution, that is highest. They become completely liberated from the cycle of birth and death. They reach Kaivalyam, that's a Sanskrit term. In fact, the fourth chapter, the final chapter of the Yoga Sutra text is Kaivalyapada. That part of the text that deals with the liberation, the highest spiritual enlightenment. So this is an important point. This is the background of our discussion. Now, in the 19th Sutra, Patanjali tries to explain who are these great men or women who have transcended this higher level but still bound by their attraction for these celestial supernatural powers. That's why Bhavapratyaya Videha Prakritilayanam means the Bhavapratyaya. They belong to this. They belong to these Prakriti Layas. So that means those who are as Sampraknyata Samadhi is devoid of Paravairagya, these great men and women who reach the Prakriti Lina stage, they are not able to reach the highest stage because they are not endowed with Saddha, Viryam, etc., all other qualities that we are going to discuss today. I'm going fast because this is something that we already discussed. Next stage is, of course, the 20th Sutra. That's what we are going to discuss today. That's important. So this is the background. And I know there is a great disconnect when we read this part of the Yoga Sutras. You feel some thread is lost. We are not able to connect. What are these specially endowed great persons? Well, for those who believe in the Puranas, let us say, some of the great sages who did a lot of spiritual practices, but still could not reach the highest liberation. Their spiritual practices, their spiritual achievements are not lost. When they are born again, they show all these characteristics. We are not talking about incarnations, those whom we normally consider as incarnations. We are talking about the generality of exceptional souls, exceptionally enlightened persons. They may not be epoch makers like Sri Ramakrishna or Buddha or Christ or Shankaracharya, but they are spiritually evolved persons, because we see them when they are born immediately. They show this extreme attraction for higher values, and they display a sense of spiritual awareness in all their actions and feelings, which means they have already traveled a long distance in their past life and reached a point, but they have not reached this asamprakyata yoga, so they are born again. So in the Puranas you find, Hindu mythological books you find, and of course, as I mentioned, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, you can find these higher beings who are supposed to be the residents of Surga, heaven, etc. Well, I am trying to connect these sutras with a thread so that we can make some sense of what it is. So, when you find people Not too many, but you can still find many men and women who are born with a kind of great spiritual attraction for spiritual values, and a willingness to live according to them, but also endowed with great powers of mind, of intellect, thoughts, etc. That's because they have already traveled a long distance. They may belong to this samprajnata level. That is the understanding we should keep in mind. Otherwise, we will think we are talking something totally mythological or utopian. That's why I'm trying to somehow connect this concept with our own level of understanding. So the 20th sutra describes the highest, that is asamprajnata samadhi. The sutra is Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, Purvaga, Iteresham. This is the 20th sutra. In the case of course, literally speaking means others. Iteresha means when you talk about the other category, means the superior category. Those who have reached the asamprajnata samadhi, which means they won't be born again. They are fully liberated from the cycle, the wheel of samsara, as they call in Buddhism and also Hinduism, which is conceived to be a wheel that rotates between birth, life, death and rebirth. This wheel. So it goes on rotating, but they are free from it, they are liberated from it. Now, they are completely liberated from it. I mean, in the case of others, what happens? This samprajnata samadhi comes through faith. These are literal translations. It needs a lot of explanation. It's not faith as we understand in the ordinary English language or vocabulary. Faith, energy and memory, concentration and illumination. All these are natural characteristics of those who reach this highest samadhi. Now, what are these terms used here? That needs some explanation. Sattha. These are the characteristics of those who have reached the asamprajnata samadhi, the highest spiritual enlightenment. Now, of course, very often you find in Buddhist tradition, many of these terms are explained very elaborately. That's because Buddhist scholars made a huge contribution to the interpretative literature of yoga tradition. So one of them is, for example, Aryadeva. He wrote a well-known book. It's called Bodhicharya Avatara. Bodhicharya means the way of life, of enlightenment, of those who are enlightened, so to speak. So Aryadeva, he writes, according to him, Saddha is defined by Aryadeva. These are all Sanskrit books. As you should remember, there are two fundamental classifications of Buddhist canonical literature. The more profound and the later interpretative works were all written in Sanskrit, and the earlier books which give the fundamental teachings of Buddhist tradition, these teachings are contained in the Tripitaka's, with three baskets. That's how they translate in English. Tripitaka's. Pitaka means a kind of container in which all these great teachings are found. It's all in Pali language. It's called Pali canonical literature of Buddhism. That's the early part of the evolution of Buddhist philosophy. Tripitaka means Sutta Pitaka, Vinaya Pitaka, Abhidhamma Pitaka. But the more profound interpretative literature, I mean commentaries and super commentaries and commentaries over the commentaries and so on, they were all mostly written in Sanskrit. You can find Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, Dignaga, many, of course, I'm not going into those details. So Aryadeva wrote this well-known book. It's called Bodhicharya Avatara. So he says, what is Saddha? Aryadeva is a Buddhist monk, but is explaining what Saddha implies in the context of yoga philosophy. So he says, Etadeva samasena samprajnadasya lakshanam. He says, this in short, that is Shraddha, is in short, is the characteristic of samprajnajanya, means mind. So that is actually, it's a very interesting term. It is actually mindfulness. The term relates to what we now call mindfulness. It is called samprajnanya, means is samprajnada, means proper understanding. Prajna, proper understanding, awareness, an illumined understanding, or awareness or enlightenment. This Shraddha is the essence of proper understanding. Virya is, of course, it is yat kaya chittavastayaha pratyavesha muhurmuhu viryam, which means the ability to keep in mind this higher awareness all the time with great energy, great determination, not giving up. And the third one is called Sati in Pali, in the book, somebody called Smriti is the Sanskrit term. This is what Patanjali uses, which means to be watchful of every second of the various states of the body and mind. So when you read this Samprajnata Samadhi, according to Buddhist tradition, maybe this interpretation may not be always acceptable. The traditional yoga commentators like Bhoja, or even modern yoga commentators, Hariharan, Aranya and others. But Buddhists always interpreted many of the yoga teachings in the line of, let's say, mindfulness, awareness, etc. So, Sati or Smriti means being always watchful every second of the various states of the body and mind. So, if you are always watchful of the evolution of the body and mind, what is happening, then you become fully aware of the fundamental truth of momentariness. Everything is momentary. Nothing is permanent. The fundamental Buddhist doctrine of impermanence, mikshanikata. So, if we can watch our own body, our own mind, try to focus on our body and our mind. Try to analyze and focus on the reality of the continuous changes happening in our body and mind. Then we understand everything is changing. If everything is changing, nothing is permanent. So the fundamental doctrine of momentariness becomes a fact of our everyday, every minute experience if a spiritual teacher actually practices this discipline. So that is called Smriti. Now this should be done with great tenacity, energy and focus. Is called Viryam, and of course it should be all based on Shraddha. Shraddha is, even according to Swami Vivekananda, Shraddha is a word that cannot really be translated into any other language, because it is a spiritual quality that could only be experienced but cannot be explained. Let us say in modern language we can try to give an approximate description of what Shraddha actually implies. Let's say a sense of sanctity, sacredness, integrity, identity with what we experience. That can approximately mean, in a fashion, it could mean something that Shraddha actually implies. So this is a very, very well-known interpretation from Buddhist tradition. Now, the purpose of this practice of constant remembrance is to free the mind from the automatic unconscious impulses and feelings that come to the mind. If we spend our time, if we focus on the reality of the unreality of body and mind, remember that term. What does it mean by focusing on the reality of the unreality? The relative reality is that mind is always changing. Body is always changing. It's a fact that we experience. And that reality should convince us of the fundamental, essential unreality of body and mind. Why unreal? Is everything is changing. It is impermanent. Everything is impermanent. There is nothing really real with a capital letter R. And that's an experience that comes naturally when you observe your own mind and your own body. In fact, that's why you can find in the yoga and tantra tradition, there are ideas which tell you, suppose you have a illness on the body, you focus on it with so much of samyama, and then you'll be able to free from, if you are feeling terrible pain, let's say, focus on the pain. And what does the pain indicate? The pain indicates, if there's headache, let us say, of course, please don't experiment this. I'm trying to explain this to give as far as possible, a clear explanation of what this implies. Suppose we can concentrate on that part of the body that gives little pain. You understand, something that gives pain, and later the pain goes away, and pain may return afterwards. It means it's changing. This body is not permanent, it's impermanent, it's changing. And if it is changing, why should we worry too much about it? If it is impermanent, then why should we worry too much about it? A person feeling extreme anxiety, observe the mind. Well, mind is anxious now, suffering anxiety, neurosis or depression. So you focus on the fact of that anxiety which you are feeling. What does it show? It shows mind is impermanent. Why? Because after some time, anxiety goes away, and again it may return, and it can go away again. What it means is the fundamental fact of impermanence. Or essentially it's only relative, it is not real in the capital letter R. It's not real. Once you are fully aware of this, you can really feel a kind of, at least some peace. You won't really worry too much about it. A sensible person who knows the fact that money comes and goes, he won't worry too much if he loses some money now, because he knows that it comes back again, and again it can disappear. So he can look upon it as something impermanent. So the fact of impermanence actually points to the fact that everything is kshanika. That is the Buddhist doctrine, kshanikatva, kshanikatavada, the doctrine, the philosophy of the fundamental impermanence of everything that is the empirical level. Now, this is a person who has reached this asampragnata samadhi, he will be able to transcend all negativity using a modern language. Because negativity is actually the result of poisonous mental food that we have eaten. If you feed our mind with dirty food, unhygienic food, that mind becomes restless, mind becomes depressed sometimes, and the result of this comes back as negativity. So a spiritual seeker who has reached the asampragnata samadhi, he transcends the mind, he goes beyond mind. So he goes beyond the aberrations and the waverings of mind. So that's why Patanjali says that this Samadhi is accompanied by Shraddha, Viryam, Smriti. That constant remembering of the fact of the fundamental impermanence of everything in this world, including our own body and mind. And to remember this with great energy, with great faith, with great concentration, great vigor, that is Viryam. And of course, one should practice this spiritual discipline with a sense of sanctity, seriousness and integrity. That is Shraddha. Of course, there are, if you read the interpretative books, it is possible for a beginner to be somewhat confused because the commentators have different views. What I had given just now is a general fundamental idea of what asamprajnata samadhi actually means in terms of our everyday life. It means transcending the mind, transcending the source of negativity and going beyond our obsession with everyday experiences that create a lot of problems in our life. That from the common man's point of view, this is the result of this. This is the fundamental benefit of this. Vyasa has many things to say. Vyasa's interpretation, Vyasa divides asamprajnata into bhavapratyaya and upayapratyaya. Of course, we should remember Vyasa is a great commentator who first appears in the lineage of yoga interpreters. But it is not proper for us to overlook the great sages' views when we go through these sutras. Bhavapratyaya asamprajnata occurs to videhas and prakritilayas. This is according to Vyasa. Of course, Bhoja and other interpreters differ. Now, one important point that I want to mention here is that something related to Hatha Yoga. That's something. You see, now, some yogis advancing to a great extent in this kind of premature asamprajnata, without Shraddha, Virya and Smriti, etc. What happens to them? They reach a kind of Jada Samadhi. So that's something I shall make it clear, which is generally attained by the practitioners of Kejari Mudra in the Hatha Yoga. So it is said in the fundamental books of Hatha Yoga, Pradipika, Hiranda Samhita, Shiva Samhita, and so on. Through the practice of a mudra, Kejari Mudra, one can reach a kind of samadhi. And frequently it is mentioned, this is frequently described to be a very high state. But from a spiritual perspective, it is only a kind of Jada Samadhi, where all the powers of the mind are benumbed so that you feel the absence of mind. You don't transcend, but you go beyond the sensitivity of your own mind. That's why in modern times, great teachers like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and even Vivekananda himself in his own interpretative articles that he wrote before he begins his Yoga Sutra commentaries, he gives a strong warning and he clearly states that the effects of practicing Kejari Mudra doesn't have much spiritual value, except that it gives a calmness, quietude and peace, but it doesn't really take you to a higher level of your own spiritual awareness, which is possible only by practicing this asamprajnata samadhi along with Shraddha, Viryam and Smriti. That is a sense of sanctity and sacredness with great energy. And also I already mentioned, one should be able to really understand the relativity of the fundamental impermanence of everything that is empirical, including the body and mind. Such a person reaches a very high level of spiritual enlightenment. That's why Swami Vivekananda, while interpreting Yoga Sutra lectures, Yoga Sutras, he brings in a lot of Vedanta. And that's because Swamiji's main goal was to introduce this as a great spiritual doctrine to the world. Not exactly the way Patanjali committed detachment. Swamiji's real goal, real purpose was to project this yoga practice as a great spiritual discipline, but the higher realization is beyond that. That's why Swamiji brings the idea of Atman in the sense of Brahman. Swamiji brings in his interpretations. So, as I mentioned earlier, Yoga Sutras make sense only when you read it in the light of Vedanta. Otherwise, Yoga Sutra is great discipline to achieve mental peace and tranquility and so on. But real spiritual growth, spiritual enlightenment goes beyond attaining a degree of peace and tranquility of mind. It is something far beyond that. You become identified with something universal, something sublime, something transcendental. That is the highest goal of spiritual realization. That's Buddha, of course, mentions that. And now we come to the 21st Sutra. In this sutra, Patanjali is talking about a need for intense practice, a degree of intensity, a degree of concentration and focus in our practice of yoga disciplines. Tivra samveganam asanna means for those endowed with the tivra means intensity, so something that is intense. Tivrada means intensity, with great focus. If a person practices a spiritual discipline with a great intensity, with a great focus, he will be able to bring in all his mental and physical powers and focus into what he is doing. You can see when you clean a table, clean the floor, you forget everything else, and your eyes are focused exactly, completely on the floor that you are cleaning, and the body is also the hand with which you are working the cleaning instrument is also fully focused, and your eyes are fully focused. Then what happens? The act of the cleaning becomes better and quicker. Yet you attain your goal of cleaning the place much faster, because within a short span of time you are bringing a lot of energy and focus into what we are doing. So the work is done fast. Like that, Tivra samveganam asannaha. For those who are endowed with great samvega, means aspiration, intense aspiration. Tivra samyoga. Tivra means with great aspiration. Samyak vega, samvega, which is tivra. Aspiration which is fully focused, which is intense. For them, this experience becomes rather it comes without much delay. They attain this goal much delay. That means tivra samveganam. Of course, according to commentators, they say dridha samskara chittanam asanna means it comes to them very quickly. So dridha samskara chittanam means dridha means strong, powerful. intense. Samskara means if a person is doing a work, but he had already acquired a lot of experience, maybe he has done that work many times in the past. So, in his mind, he has a clear understanding as to how that work should be done properly, should be done effectively. Because when he does that work, all the previous experiences and the benefits become helpful to him. Now, a spiritual seeker who has already done, repeatedly done for a long time, he is able to bring in a lot of intensity into his spiritual practice. For those spiritual seekers, the result comes rather without much delay. Samadhi lamaha, samadhi phalamcha. That is the commentator's Vyasa. I mean, tivra samveganam, drida samskara chittanam asannaha, samadhi labhaha, samadhi phalamcha. Those who practice with great intensity, where mind, body, and also our tendencies, impulses, all of them are focused on that single point. Whether you read, you meditate, or pray, or anything, where it's called ekagra. Ekagra means agra is eka. Agra means it's the point. So a sphere, its effectiveness as a tool depends upon its one-pointedness. A needle, its effectiveness depends upon its sharpness or one-pointedness. If it is blunt, it means it will a blunt, bigger surface. But if it is pointed, it becomes effective. Like the mind also can be made a sharp instrument for spiritual practice. People who are reading a book while thinking of something else, they may not remember what they have read, because their mind becomes blunt. So that's why, in the Gita I say Buddha avyavasayinam, buddhega avyavasayinam means those who don't have a focus and they are not able to remember. But if that person reads that book with his eyes focused fully on the letter, with the mind also fully focused on the implication, the meaning of that particular word, and immediately in his mind he connects that word and its meaning to an object that he has seen earlier, then it remains registered in his mind. This ability to do things with intensity is the fundamental characteristic of a yogi. A yogi will be able to remember things, lot of things relatively easily without much effort. You can find this in the lives of even modern day thinkers like Swami Vivekananda and others. Of course, there are the great men and women who have tremendous powers of memory. They may not be conventional yogis, but according to yoga perspective, they may have practiced some kind of mental discipline in the past, so that they have achieved this ability to focus exclusively, intensely on what they are doing. This is interesting. That's why Tivra Samveganam, Trida Samskara Chittanam, Samadhi Labhaga, Samadhi Phalamcha Asannaha. For them, the Samadhi is easily attained very soon. Asanna means the word is very soon and without delay. So it's an important discussion on this. It is a general discipline for everyone that we should remember. Of course, today I will conclude now, because we we already discussed a lot of ideas today. You can have interaction, you can ask questions, you are most welcome. You can ask questions from what we discussed earlier, the early chapters also. So that because there was some interruption last week, we didn't have class, so I want to bring back what we already discussed earlier from previous chapters. Most welcome. Yeah. There seems to be a question that appeared on the screen just now. There is some confusion about Viveka, Khyadi, Prajna, etc. Well, before trying to answer this question, I must tell you, when it comes to yoga practice, which involves meditation, etc., it becomes clear to us only when we actually practice. But it is possible to discuss at the intellectual level. Viveka Khyadi of Prajna, in essence what it means is, we reach a level of inner awareness, inner enlightenment that helps us to perceive things in their totality, in its most comprehensive manner. And it is not purely an intellectual concept. It has something to do with the purification of the mind as we remove vrittis from our chittam. As vrittis slowly get removed, that's why Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodhaha. That is yoga, that is Samadhi. As we attain this Vritti Nirodha, transcending the Vrittis, our mind becomes more and more clear. And with that mind, we are able to perceive ideas and things in their totality and the most comprehensive manner. And we are able to perceive the essence of it. Totality, it means the essence, not numerical totality, but essential totality. We are able to clearly comprehend what an idea or what a concept actually implies. That has nothing to do with intellectual enlightenment, intellectual verbosity or anything. Mind which is clear easily connects with the essence of what is trying to perceive. This, of course, this can be explained with the help of some examples. When our mind is confused, mind has lot of ideas, lot of pluralistic ideas, we won't be able to focus our mind on anything. So, the Viveka Khyadi of Prajna means, in fact, Prakashena Jnayadeti Prajna. Prajna itself means this. Where mind reaches a level of clarity, precision, and tranquility and peace, it can, on the one hand, feel an inner joy and peace and tranquility. It also is able to perceive things with greater clarity and comprehensiveness. That's
Hello, Maharaj.
yeah.
Maharaj, one question which keeps coming to my mind is when we so people who have this pursuit, who are attempting to search for this spiritual understanding, are typically very ambitious people. They want to. It is an ambition which also drives them to want to understand all of this. They want to. They push themselves to the limit, right? So these very simple, not simple, but these very basic ideas of joy or inner peace, which is where this is set to lead. These are very, very simple, basic ideas. Are there is there an easy way to practice this? Because it comes from a place of ambition. Your drive comes from a place of ambition, but the idea is somehow to extinguish that ambition. So,
well, yeah. Thank you. No, I shall let us think of a man like Buddha. The reason why I'm giving Buddha as an example. It's a classic example. It's a well-known example. Buddha reached enlightenment. What we call Bodha or Bodhi, whatever it is. That's actually what he reached, this Viveka Khyadi, went beyond that. And then what did he do? He walked straight to Benares, Varanasi, and started preaching, teaching, giving his message to a group of sages who were living, a group of ancient Hindu sages were living there. And he preached this among them, and they became his first converts. In those days there was no conversion in the sense that we understand today. They became fully convinced of the great teachings of Buddha. And now he may have reached this stage, most probably when he was 35 or 36, or maybe around that age. He was a young man when he left his palace, 28 years. He must have practiced for some years and may have reached 35 or 38 years. And he lived up to his 80th year. He passed away when he was 80 years. What did he do? He was traveling all over northern part of India, all the way to Nepal, extreme east, and all the way to today's Afghanistan. At that time it was known as Gandhara Desha. Just imagine. So, after enlightenment, what he does after enlightenment is not what we understand to be an ambitious action. It is not ambitious action. The natural habit of a person who has reached a level of spirituality, he will discuss, he will teach this to people. What else will he do? His body is there, energy is there, and long life in front of him. What will such a man do? Can he just keep quiet somewhere? Live like a stone? He won't do. What he will do? He will give out what he has got to everyone. Likewise, Sri Ramakrishna. Till he passed away, he was teaching. Practically, Sri Ramakrishna was teaching till the last moment of his passing away. Vivekananda, surprisingly, he was teaching the foundational work in Sanskrit grammar, Panini's grammar, Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. Not an easy book to study or to teach. And that was about 3 hours he was teaching before he passed away. And before the previous days, he went round the Belum grounds. He talked about starting a Veda Vidyalaya in that part of the country, all that, And then the day he passed away, till almost till a few hours before his passing away, he was teaching this. Can you imagine somebody who is he knows he was going to pass away, and he had already predicted, in fact. You immediately takes up a complicated book on engineering or medicine and takes classes for 3 hours. Can you imagine modern times? A normal person will worry, will be crying and weeping. Oh, I won't be there tomorrow. No, and he would lose his mind. But Vivekananda, with a smile, he asked his disciples to come and assemble. We'll discuss. What? Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. Actually, in Sanskrit grammar, in terms of effort, it is easier to study Guru Siddhanta Kaumudi, Bhattacharya Diksha's bigger, that is the Siddhanta Kaumudi, is easier to learn because it closely follows. It's a much bigger book, many times bigger than Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi is a compressed version of Panini's grammar, and it's much more difficult to teach and study because everything is compressed. And Swamiji was doing that, And then when he passed away, he asked the disciple to stand outside, and he meditated for many hours. Then he lay down and he breathed his last. But he was doing all this, traveling to America, traveling or traveling all over the world teaching Vedanta and all that. It was not ambitious. It was not ambition. It was the natural characteristic of a Buddha or a Vivekananda or a Shankaracharya. Arguably, if you look at the history of humanity, maybe the most hardworking human specimen we have known to history Shankaracharya. Vivekananda did everything within from 1893 to 1902, 9 years. Swamiji worked 9 years, within which he did all this great work, Swamiji. Shankaracharya wrote the most exquisite Sanskrit poetry, the most profound, mind-boggling philosophical classics, founded 10 monastic orders. Remember, Ignatius Loyola found just the pseudo-order. So that's why Sister Nivedita say that Shankaracharya is by describing Shankaracharya, she says Shankara is the Augustine, Aquinas, and Ignatius Loyola, and Eberhard, the great theologians, and Socrates, Aristotle, and all these, and also some of the greatest poets and a great missionary are rolled into one. Now, after enlightenment, you have got these great men, Sri Ramakrishna, Jesus Christ, or Buddha, or Shankaracharya, working much harder than any other people, as if they have something to achieve, nothing to achieve. If they just passed away immediately, nobody will complain. So you find some of the most hardworking human beings the world has seen are these enlightened spiritual teachers, whether it is Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, or Shankaracharya, Buddha, Christ. Think of all this. So the great amount of work they did. So remember, ambition and work, they are not necessarily twin brothers. One can work with great enthusiasm, with zero ambition. And one can have a lot of ambition and do nothing. So, ambition and work are not twin brothers. They are not born together. There is no connection actually in between them. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Another question appeared on the screen, but I was discussing something at that time. I couldn't focus. I didn't read it.
I think Yogi had just made the point that Sri Ramakrishna's explanation is also very good on this point. You remove a thorn with another thorn, but throw both away afterwards.
Precisely.
To get liberated and falls away after liberation.
True. Yeah, that's true. Sri Ramakrishna's gospel puts all these great spiritual ideas in very simple language, in a very unconventional but very beautiful language. A lot of parables, illustrations and metaphors which are very moving and very touching. That's why it's a great classic. So, if we have no question, today I wanted to conclude early because we had some interval, so I didn't want to load too much of matter in one session today. That's all. We will continue next week. And thank you especially. Okay, there is another question. Yeah, the body consciousness gives ambition. Is not. In ambition. Yeah, that's true. Ambition is always linked to our interpretation of ourselves as a body-mind complex. Yeah. Otherwise, in Gita you can find sakama karma and lokanugraha. You can find two types. Sakama karma is ambition, where a person is focused on a reward, a result that he expects from the work he is doing. That is sakama karma. And lokanugraha means loka sangraha, sometimes it's called. the natural reflex action of a great spiritual teacher to be always doing something for the benefit of others, like giving instruction, writing books, building temples, building churches, and spreading the message, because that itself becomes the natural reflex action. Reflex action is so involuntary. It comes, you don't have to work hard for that. It's natural characteristic. Even when Sri Ramakrishna met a great monk in Benares, his name is Trailinga Swami. Now, Trailinga Swami was not a missionary, but he was an enlightened person. He was living a very secluded life. It is said that he lived for close to 300 years or more. That's according to many historical sources. So Sri Ramakrishna met him, and there were people around, and those who came to him, he was teaching spiritual values. Trailinga Swami. What else will they do? So there is natural reflex action of every great spiritual person to be always engaged in spreading higher values, either by building institutions, reforming society, or building organizations, writing books, writing devotional hymns. There's a natural action. You won't keep quiet. So thank you for those questions, and namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
The recording has stopped.
Thank you.